So with us today, we have Clipping. So we have Jonathan, David, William from Clipping here to answer our questions on this lovely Wednesday afternoon. So we do have a list of pre-submitted questions. So if you were one of the lovely students who submitted a question, make sure you check that email so that you know what order we're going in, so that you're ready to read your question when prompted. And so what I'll do is I will unmute you when it's time, or I'll give you permission to speak, and then you'll have an opportunity to read your question from there. So one thing that I know at least 4 or 5 different students asked in various capacities, and I guess a natural place to begin would be, how did you guys start making music together?
Well,
yeah, one of you guys should start, since it kind of started before me a little bit.
we've all known each other forever. You two have known each other literally forever. And then I'm kind of the new guy. I've only known you both for like 20 years.
Yeah. One day you'll be done with the hazing.
Yeah. Somehow that seems unlikely. But no, because Bill and I met in college and lived together throughout college, and then David would just come and like crash on our couch when his school ended and ours was still going a little bit. And we were all making music separately, but we didn't really make music together for a while. Bill and I had some noise projects, and then Bill had a project with another friend of ours where he had done some like noise remixes of existing rap songs. And there was one in particular that I really liked. And I said, hey, there's a whole project here, like of these really kind of abstract, I mean, all music is abstract, but these really like kind of noise remixes of rap songs that aren't just putting sort of aperiodic noise over an acapella, right? That are actually using these elements of like repetition and periodicity to make it feel like a beat, but not using any of the sort of standard beat elements. And so I said, let's make that project together. And we started doing these remixes where we would take existing acapellas, make sort of loops out of field recordings and modular synths and things, and put them underneath. David moved to LA, heard what we were doing, and was like, hey, we should probably try to make an original song like this. Song Loud.
Yeah, because David had been rapping for a while. I mean, David was in a rap group when we were in high school. So we all sort of knew he could do it.
He passed the audition. Yeah. And then we made the first one. I remember we did, because Bill and I were playing shows as Clipping, where we were sort of just DJing these tracks that we had made and adding some additional sort of noise elements live. And we did one show where it was like, a 25-minute set of our remixes, or a 20-minute set or something. And then David came at the end to do the one song Loud. And we were like, oh, this is the band. This is what we're doing. Let's make some more songs.
It was the first time anyone seeing us live had liked our project. Like, Jonathan and I had been playing to frowns for like so long. And then David came up and everyone was like, that band's great. Like,
yeah.
I guess that's what we're doing now.
More of that guy. Yeah.
Put him in the front.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I like how and regrettably I'm not usually able to use too much material from Mid-City in my classes, for a variety of reasons. But I'm fascinated by the fact that that's sort of how some of those tracks came to be. That's how Loud came to be, where it was this sort of, I don't want to say impromptu experimentation, but this idea that you were doing this set live, you brought David on stage, and it was this almost organic moment of it came together live. And it was that energy of seeing the crowd react to that live that sort of moved things along.
Well, we've talked about this a couple times, where like there's this weird thing that happens, when my dog's over here making lots of noise. When when you're a band who doesn't have a record deal or whatever, like you sort of make songs live in a way. Like you make them, but they don't really exist until you perform them. You're not like recording and then you like perform them a bunch, and then eventually you'll turn them into a record. And then you start getting record focused and it works the opposite way. So, once we started making albums.
We used to write songs because we'd be like, we have a show coming up next week. Let's write like 3 more songs for the show coming up.
Yeah.
And now it's like, we just stay in the studio, write songs. And then when the album comes out, then we have to go, oh no, we have to do a live show now. And we have to do all these new songs that we've never performed before ever.
Right. That we don't know. It's a weird process of like having to relearn music that you spent a long time making. But like playing a show now, I'm always like, can we not add too many? My brain can't hold. Like I don't have the time to learn the song I wrote.
and then stuff that we don't play at shows, we kind of forget, and like the songs kind of take on a new life. Like it was actually, I mean, playing those few tracks at the beginning, like we were all texting separately. We're just like, wow, I haven't heard the album versions of the ones we play live so long, and none of us have heard All Black in like
since we did the
probably
since I listened to the test pressing in 2016. Yeah,
we played the whole album at the first show.
Oh yeah, we played that
album release. I had to read that one.
Yeah,
I had to read that one off the phone.
I'm glad I could give you that blast from the past with that one. And so sort of related to that question, as far as your introduction to this current creative enterprise that is clipping, going back a little further, we have a question from Anna, who would like to ask you something about pursuing this career.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I had a couple questions. Being like, when did you guys know you were gonna pursue careers in the arts? Did you guys receive any judgments or other struggles in your career? And if so, how did you guys deal with them?
I mean, I don't know that you really pursue a career in the arts. You just kind of make art until either it works out or it doesn't. I don't know.
That's absolutely true. I mean, that's not true of everyone, but that's true of us. I definitely knew a lot of friends who are, successful artists from, people in high school who were like, I'm going to be this. And then they were. And I was always much more like, I'm going to make my art in secret until it turns out it might be okay, and then maybe I'll be allowed to say that I kind of want to do this, because otherwise it would just be so embarrassing to me. I was just like so crippled by fear of like making everything in secret, or making everything not well. And also, to be fair, there wasn't really much hope for a career in the arts until we certainly didn't start this band thinking that this was going to be a career.
No.
We kind of thought this was a weird thing that only we would like, which it was for a couple of years.
It was for a while, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I probably exist somewhere in between those two poles, but you do you just make things or do things or and the other interesting thing that happens is you run out of skill set that's not the art you're working on. There are a lot of things I can't do now because I haven't been learning those versions of what would be careers, right? So we've been artists for so long that that's kind of got to make that work at this point. So I think but I think eventually you just find that you've been doing it for so long that you don't it's just, well, this is what I do. And what's interesting is that as you try to figure out how to commodify that or get help commodifying that, people put a whole bunch of labels on it and try to shape it into something that's marketable that doesn't really have anything to do with how you consider yourself as an artist. And I think that's okay. You can figure out, you can let somebody else or a group of people or an industry figure out how to write your check. And you get to keep plugging away at the things that interest you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also not sure that I ever even decided to have a career. I mean, I have a PhD, so I was just supposed to be an academic. I only started doing this other stuff more seriously pretty recently. So, you know, I still didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up 3 years ago.
I always kind of I don't know. I think we all came, I don't necessarily want to speak for the two of you, but I think we all came from like pretty supportive backgrounds. Like our parents were very excited about us doing, like finding a thing that we loved. And in my particular case, it was because my whole family is Seventh-day Adventist. And when you grow up as a Seventh-day Adventist in the 40s and 50s, there were kind of only a couple of options. Like you either go into medicine, the church, or education, right? You're either a doctor, a preacher, or a teacher, basically, are like the three things you can do as an Adventist in the 50s in America. And my parents were pretty, I think, felt pretty limited by that. Those are obviously those are all like fine professions, but but they both, you know, my mom wanted to be a violinist but couldn't play she was invited to play in like the Santa Monica symphony when she was a teenager, but her mother wouldn't let her because they practiced on Saturday on the Sabbath, you know. And so I think my parents had this like really strong like I grew up with this idea that if you wanted to be an artist and you weren't being an artist, you were somehow lying to yourself or being untrue to yourself, which I don't think is true anymore. But I understand why kind of my upbringing instilled that in me. So I never had any of the like familial argument, you know, that like what I wanted to do was a impossible or a waste of a life, or like, you know, that whole kind of cliche of the like, but how are you going to make a living? You have to have a plan B kind of thing. Like my mom was just so excited that I had found a thing that I was truly passionate about, that she really, you know, wanted to support me pursuing that, because she never got to, right? She never got to be the violinist that she wanted to be. She got to do, you know, she taught English and loved that and loves literature, and, you know, she has definitely found things that she loves, but I think that stayed with her in a way that influenced my upbringing greatly.
Awesome. So up next, kind of moving a little further into your careers, but also taking into account that even since Clipping started, you guys have been involved in so many other projects along the way. Caroline has a question, so let me go ahead and let her into the session. Here we go. Hello.
Right. Hi. How have your past experiences and how have your past experiences in film, theater, music composition, sound design, et cetera, contributed to the productions of songs and albums and other stuff in clippings, if at all?
Oh, a lot, definitely.
Yeah, a lot. I think. Thank you. Well, one of the first thing that comes to mind, one of the things that we always say is being all people who, you know, were very involved in theater and went to school, went to college and postgraduate school for theater. It was like one of the things that's really unique about this band is our way of working comes from learning how to work on theater and not being in bands. So whenever we have to work with other musicians, I think it's always confusing to us how they work, because we work like it's a play that we're putting on a play, and we all show up at the same time, and it's like boot camp rehearsal, and we have this like weird like, oh, it's everyone's job is everything. You're allowed to give notes on everything. There's no, you know, everyone's got opinions. Everyone, even if you like, this is sort of my part of the band. Like everyone just like does everything because the point is to get this thing, to get the product done. It's just a different sort of mechanic for making music than I think we've discovered other people generally have. But that's one answer.
This is not really an answer to Caroline's question, but sort of tying to the previous question, I like having gotten what is sort of on paper a useless degree. All of us did, you know, getting a useless theater degree in college, and then like I mean, obviously David's done some theater, so maybe it worked out for him. But but I see so many of our classmates, right, who also have this BA in theater, don't do theater anymore. Like it's actually like I'm one of the few, Bill you don't work in theater at all anymore. And like most of our classmates don't, but they've all gone on, mostly, the ones that I know and keep up with have gone on to these really successful careers. And I think there is I feel it when I sort of join another team working on another project, how much the theater degree really prepares you for sort of adaptability and problem solving and troubleshooting inside of a team environment that is making a thing, whatever that thing is. And I think the theater degree is a really good sort of catch-all for like working in sort of creative startups and working in kind of any kind of creative medium on teams in that way. And I definitely feel it. Like I really feel it when I'm the only person with a theater degree on like a film music team, like in the grind of like turning out music for a TV show or something. And that there is this huge learning curve for like conservatory composers and musicians who suddenly have to like make a product, and they're not really trained to do that part of the job in that music school all the time. And some of them are great at it and some of them are really not. It's super interesting. I would say the two that I don't want to hog all the time, but like the clipping was the first project where I really stopped seeing like my various avenues and disciplines that I was sort of pursuing as separate lanes. Like I thought of it's like, oh, I make music as a hobby, and then I'm also a theater sound designer by like education. And then by the time we'd started clipping, I had sort of fallen into this accidental career scoring movies. And that was still like, that was like job stuff. That was not my artistic expression, were my film scores. I was like doing those for money, and I had that career and I had my theater sound design career, and then clipping and the other like sort of pure music I was making, that actually felt like me and my expression of me. And I didn't really I ignored the sort of lessons and things that I'd learned from that other stuff until clipping. And suddenly I realized that, oh, they're all the same. They're all part of the same, trajectory, and all of the techniques and ideas. And I mean, even just like as dumb as workflow stuff that I've learned in these other things should be applied to this music I'm making, and it'll make all of these lanes better. Which I think was, and I think that's a kind of revelation that we all sort of had doing that too, that it was really the first time. What's weird is we set out to make this music that was sort of defiantly impersonal. David wasn't using first person, and we were trying very hard to like not put our own identities in the music. And I think we ended up making the most personal music that we could make, that it was really about the three of us in a very specific way. But
yeah, it is. And that's really interesting. It is because like so much of it's sort of formally and structurally also about us, which I don't know that I'd ever worked on anything else where that was true. Where like actually the construction of it was as much about me as probably more about me than any of the content of the songs,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, not to get into it, but of course it is. I mean, we made all these. I mean, it's just like John Cage and Indeterminacy.
Right.
Don't worry about this artist, famous conceptual artist who made all these rules for making art so that he wasn't making personal choices. But of course, he wrote the rules.
Right.
So the art was still completely about his own identity and his own way of seeing the world. But the entire idea was to leave everything up to chance. But then, he's not, even the choice to do that says something about what he wants to say about who he is and how he sees the world. So, we made the rules, even though the point was to take ourselves out of the equation.
So speaking of the process of making music and maybe the degree to which you guys are more personally involved with the themes or the construction of a particular song, we have Nicole here who has some questions about the sort of process, as you mentioned, the workflow of putting a piece together. So let's promote Nicole here. Oh, let's see here. All right, so Nicole, you're going to get a very exclusive opportunity here because it's saying that I have to promote you to panelists for you to speak. So you're going to join us over here in the big leagues to ask your question.
Good,
there we go.
I got some questions for Nicole.
Oh, I think you're muted.
Hi.
Hey.
Hey.
Okay, so I had a question more so about the process in creating a song. So is it like you're trying to tell a story, or do you just think of like a certain cadence or lyric and go from there? And then kind of like, I guess the age-old question for any songwriter is, when do you know a song is done?
Yeah. I mean, songs start for us in a few different ways. And if you know, maybe I'll have a cadence or lyric idea. Bill will usually have a story idea if it's like coming from him, or like it should be a song in this style about this thing. And then, or Jonathan usually has like a technical idea, like I want to make a sound like this, or this kind of sound should be a whole song, or we should patch these things up this way and see what happens. So those are like,
yeah,
you know,
a lot of
this sort of like,
Or just like the Jonathan has all the musical ideas. Jonathan has this is a time signature we've never worked in.
Right. No,
or like Nothing Is Safe, which you played. Jonathan composed that whole. He woke up one morning with the entire melody of Nothing Is Safe, apparently in his head, that he had been and he saved it for years, just humming it. And then one day we were in the studio and he was like, "Let's actually make that beat."
Well, I wasn't sure.
Completely fully formed.
I wasn't sure that it wasn't already a John Carpenter score.
That was why.
So much. I was humming it and I was like, oh, I'll save that for a movie or something when I need to do a John Carpenter feeling thing. And then I remember Bill and I sat and listened to every John Carpenter score, trying to make sure that it wasn't one.
It does sound so much like, I mean, it's perfect.
When that video dropped, I immediately, and I know this is like everyone, I wasn't unique in this respect because everyone had the same idea. Everyone just went Assault on Precinct 13. Like before we even listened to the words, we're just like, oh, it sounds like that synth from Assault on Precinct 13. So I remember like looking up the album on YouTube and being like, okay, is it an homage to this? And then looking at the lyrics, it was just like, oh, wow, no, this is sort of like a spin on that.
It doesn't happen very often that a melody just comes to my head. Like there's this fantasy that like being a composer means that's how all the songs happen, right? Like that's how all the melodies happen, and it might happen once every 3 or 4 years. But when it does, it's always very satisfying.
Sometimes there ends up being like melody in some songs of ours sometimes where like I'll do something, I'll like have put some melodic thing on a lyric and Jonathan will be like, oh, that's almost good, hold on, like, and then just start like playing notes and be like, here, wait, no, this is it, wait, and then oh yeah, now it's a melody.
But yeah, back to the more to the question though, is like one of the things that happens is, as you can sort of see, is we all three just go around with just stacks of ideas we've had over the days or weeks or months of like, oh, we should do a song like this. A song should have this, something. And some of them are little ideas and some of them are whole song ideas. But a lot of the time what happens is one of us will say like, I think there should be a song that's like something like this. So there's a song on the last album that's a good example of this, where I had reached out to a guy he's a paranormal investigator who records EVP recordings, which are supposed to be the sound of ghost voices picked up on microphones. You see it on like all those ghost hunter television shows. So I had reached out to him to use some of the audio for that, and Jonathan had this idea of how a sort of a breakcore rap song in 7/8 was going to work. And so we decided, well, what if we combine those two ideas into one thing? And then the fact that it was in 7, which is, you know, traditionally in movies, you use that for a chase scene. It looks like you're running. It's like, feels like you're tumbling forward because it cuts off that last beat. Like it's so urgent. But we were like, okay, so now this is about EVPs, ghosts, and they're chasing someone. Then it all becomes like, turns into, we sort of combine all these ideas into one thing until we're ready to actually make it, and then we have more of a vision of it.
Yeah,
it was a late song for the album too. I mean, like one of the later ones we recorded, and we didn't have a ghost story yet, so it like served a functional purpose in our horror themed
Well, and that's what I was going to say. Like making an album kind of goes through this process where like we usually know kind of what the album is going to be about, and we start with this like really wide sort of shotgun approach. We have this list of ideas, and we can use we use one of them for a song at the beginning, and then we get to the end of the process where like we kind of know what the album is, but there's like 12 ideas that we haven't done, and so we make the last song that contains all of those ideas, and that's kind of my favorite. That's kind of my favorite process. Part of the process is making like the last couple of songs for an album where we just have to cram as many ideas into them as possible, because it really like that feels the most like sort of the constraints that we developed when we started the band, right? Is that we just have this list of rules and we make a thing that accomplishes those rules, and then we decide whether or not it's good. I thought the part of your question I thought was really interesting too was like, how do you know when something's done? Because we really didn't at first. Like the first handful of clipping songs, we would do literally write down a list of things that we wanted to happen in a song or like wanted to do, and then we would just check them off one at a time. And when we got to the end of that list, we would say, I guess it's done. I don't know. And I do still I mean, that's a way of working that comes from film music, right? Is that you like go through a cue, like you watch the scene, you make this giant big picture list, and then you switch to small picture brain and you just check the things off the list. And then when you're done with that, you kind of take a macro step back and look at it again. But we were doing things that were so unlike any music that we had made before that we didn't really have rules to judge it yet. Now we do.
Yeah, now we know when a song is done. We used to really not. We used to think, we've never heard anything like this. None of us have made anything like this. None of our friends know what to think of this. I mean, you know, it's a strange feeling, but you know, our friends used to like our music before this band. And then when we first started, we would play our music, play our new songs for friends and be like, and get just wow, that's
like I really thought that I knew what the experience of having your friend politely pretend to like your music was, and then we started doing these songs, and I was like, oh no, I'm really watching someone struggle to find something nice to say.
Which made us feel good about the music we made before, because we're like, oh, people must have really actually liked that. That wasn't, no one was just lying to us.
It was like, oh, now yeah, this is a different. All right, just 1 second.
But I don't know that gave you any like direction on how to know when a song is done, which I don't know. Like it's just like it feels done. Now we're like, oh yeah, that's a song. It's good. Do you know? I think it's done when you like it.
Or when you run out of ideas, or when you have to, or when it's due.
Or when it's due.
When it's due, honestly, like that has
really
a lot.
Like the best.
You know,
the best thing.
Who said that? Was it like Truffaut or somebody who said a film isn't finished, it's abandoned? And I feel that way about basically every piece of art, right? Maybe those like one brush stroke paintings, maybe those are done because of their rules, you know. But there's always more ideas, and I've learned I think we've learned like the more we've been making songs that it's like, oh, if you have ideas about something, just like apply it to the next one, you know.
Yeah, and speaking of the combination of influences, like you mentioned with Paint Every Day, the fact that it was the story idea, this idea that a friend of yours had these kinds of recordings, 7/8 feels like this, and so it all kind of coalesced naturally into this new idea that hadn't existed before, I think is really cool. And just to knock out a couple of the questions that were submitted, but the students preferred that I read them aloud, just to combine a couple things. One person asked specifically about the sort of noisier elements in your music, whether it be from power electronics or harsh noise or industrial, or in this case, you know, breakcore. What was your main influence to start making that kind of music on your own? Your sort of personal fascination with that music, but then also what kind of motivated that transition from that to creating hip hop using that tool set, using the experiences and the tools that you had sort of honed from your personal work?
Well, I mean, speaking for myself, I would just say that in my own interest in noise comes from it's almost like just like chasing when I was in high school, I had a job at a video store, which is a very old thing to say.
I walked past an open video store yesterday in Vancouver, blew my mind. And
There are a few.
Well, I'm glad that still exists somewhere, because
They're new. Vidiot's is relaunching here in LA really soon.
anyway.
So anyway, so I worked at a video store, which meant that I just like had a little bit of extra money each week, which went exclusively to going to the Amoeba Records in Berkeley and just getting whatever I saw. And I remember this feeling, I'm trying to think, I think I had bought like a late John Coltrane album, not knowing that after 64, he just sort of abandoned key and rhythm and traditional harmony. And I remember putting it on and thinking, this is absolutely fraudulent. This is not music. I reject this entirely. And then just listening to it over and over again. And then the rest of my years were chasing that feeling of finding something. The second I put it on, I was like, this is not music. This is not okay. This is unacceptable. I reject this. This is a scam. And this is not a real musician. And then but it was like this high I was chasing of finding this sort of outrage and then teaching myself and then getting my head around it and learning about it. And yeah, I mean, I think I started, making noise and just experimental electronic music and electroacoustic music. I had sort of fallen in love with this stuff. And by college, my first like live shows were was an improvised music series in LA that was a weekly series of just like little ad hoc groupings of people who like circuit bent a toy and someone who like plays a guitar like laying across his lap and dropping things on the strings instead of, and like, there was a cellist and a woman who played just gongs, and just everyone trying to make sounds that the instruments were not designed to make, but that the idea being, these are just objects. They also make these sounds. Why is a G chord a better sound than just tapping on the top of the guitar? Or, this object makes any type of sound. You can make it make anything. Like, so I started doing that live. With other players in like a community of all these like sort of jazz players, mostly like former jazz players who had stumbled into this weird world with us. And Jonathan and I were living together at the time, but Jonathan had, I'm sure, his own path to whatever his.
Yeah, it's not dissimilar though. I mean, I definitely like had that same sort of experience of like finding a thing I didn't understand and thought was fraudulent, and then like becoming obsessed with it. I mean, it's not noise music, but I can remember finding my musical upbringing like happened kind of, I think, a little more in a void than maybe Bill and David's years did. Like I grew up in Riverside, California, which in the 80s and 90s like wasn't a great place to find new music, and I didn't have any like cool older siblings or something. But my dad, who passed away when I was quite young, was a huge lover of classical music and had left behind this amazing record collection that he had organized chronologically by like period as opposed to by composer. So I immediately sort of had a sense of like the chronology of classical music and the movements just by like looking at his organizational principles. And I became obsessed with the 20th century section, the very small 20th century section, because I didn't understand how any of the music worked in it. And so I remember hearing Philip Glass for the first time and having that reaction, right? And thinking like, this is so repetitive, it's monotonous, it's boring, and I can't stop listening to it. Like I just wore those records out and then got more into Philip Glass and then found Steve Reich on my own and then like followed these sort of rabbit holes. I remember reading an interview with John Zorn where he talks about doing the same thing actually about hardcore music. Like the first, like he was hearing like hardcore bands and saying like, what is this? This isn't music. And then being like, I have to know more. And he would just go to the record store and the guy who liked hardcore, he would say, okay, give me like 10 new records. And he would just do that every week until he liked it. And then he started a hardcore band.
I think, you know, growing up sort of with these guys and like, but making rap music, which exists on the opposite side of the thing, right? Like I was always, you know, I was always the guy in the studio who was like, hey, let's do this song in 3. Or like, let's, you know, like, but, or like, I've got this weird idea, like all based around something I read in an Ishmael Reed novel, you know, like I was always trying to like fit these kind of ideas, like formal or structural or story type ideas into the music I was making, but like in a genre that to a degree, like always leans itself towards being popular. Right. I mean, that's not true. Like I grew up listening to Freestyle Fellowship and Anti-Pop Consortium I was just talking about, but like even still, we're making music for the party, right? You're making music for people. And so there's something about rap music that always leans itself towards that. But I was going to noise shows with Bill when he started playing shows, and there was something that always really I found really exciting about the community, about like a show where people were accepting the experiment of it, right? Where like everybody there also made things, and everybody was like juiced to see somebody try something that they hadn't tried before. And so, you know, and I was always really envious of that because a rap show is the opposite. A rap show is like, do it good or get off the stage, you know, kind of thing. Like, and you want to see something polished. You want to see something like that is, you know, polished enough to like have an audience like interact with it, right? And so I think it was once we started this band, it was sort of exciting to get to at least interface with and like play shows at the places where these guys were playing shows and be like, and try things I had never tried before in front of people, which is like, as opposed to, you know, rehearsing, figuring it out, then playing a show and playing only the same songs we've played over and over again until we could like figure out a new one. Like that's how I sort of came up. But getting to do something where we were actively trying to do things differently every time was like really interesting to me and exciting for me.
Awesome. Yeah. And some of the artists that you mentioned, you know, in particular, like Steve Reich, I you know, used him in a lesson where I also used All Black as a sort of, and this is obviously not a slight against you guys because, you know, I invited you here to speak. So I'm obviously a huge fan, but I sort of juxtaposed Steve Reich, you know, clapping music with a more traditional, like rhythm-based exercise. It's like, well, guys, what's the difference between these two? When we have clapping music where it's just using the human body and these polyrhythms that are splitting apart and coming back together versus just here's a normal 4/4 beat. And I did a similar activity with All Black, which is not that it is a song devoid of beat, but I put that up against, like, I think it was either Follow the Leader or Microphone Fiend by like Eric B. and Rakim. So like just classic hip hop song. What is going on between these two songs? Like what has changed? And I think that hopefully for some kids, hearing this different take on something, on some kind of music that you have some passing familiarity with, but twisted in a new way, can hopefully provide that transformative experience of hearing something, not knowing quite what to do with it, and then becoming interested in pursuing it further. I know for me, so my first experience with truly noisy music was just like Nine Inch Nails, you know, Broken, Downward Spiral, just listening to some of the weird sounds he was making. And then from there, it kind of took off. So
impossible to overstate the influence of Nine Inch Nails on us too.
I just remember the first time I listened to the Downward Spiral front to back and just standing up and just feeling changed, just like feeling like something in my brain was different now after that album. All right, so I'm going to try and jump to some of the questions, and again, we might not get to all of the questions, but I do want to prioritize some of the questions where people wanted to ask them live, who wanted to have their voices heard and to jump in. So let's go over to Jason, who had a question sort of like retrospectively from here, looking back at your careers. So let's get Jason in on the conversation.
Since we're at the end of it, of our career.
All right, hello, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's up, man?
Hi. I just had a question, like, what's your favorite project that you've worked on, and like, why do you like that project?
I mean, always the most recent one, I think, for me, because it's at the top of my mind. So
It's hard to pick favorites. I think that the trick of being like, you know, a gigging artist, right, is like you make whatever you're working on at the time your favorite.
Yeah.
I say this knowing full well the irony of the thing I'm working on right now, but yeah, the most recent thing is always the favorite, right? Or like I don't know, it's really satisfying to me whenever a project, like when I get to the end of it, because a project is always a series of compromises, like any project, right? There's always things you wish you could have done differently. And I like getting to the end of the project and kind of feeling like, well, I wasn't hampered in any way by any external force. Like that's what I can do. And nobody took it away from me, and nobody, you know, stopped me from doing the thing I wanted to do. Like that represents my skills and abilities perfectly, because I don't know what else I would have done, which doesn't happen very often. And the real trick then is, of course, you realize that actually every project is kind of that, you know, that all of those compromises and all those external forces are still things that you have to sort of deal with, and you get to the end of a project and it is what you could do, whatever it is, which is like sobering and also kind of freeing in a way. I don't know. That doesn't answer your question at all, but I like feeling like I did my best, I guess, and that the results indicate that.
Cool. Thank you, Jason, for the question. Let's see. I think Seamus is up next.
So I wanted to ask how you gained traction in the industry, and also like who are the most interesting people you've worked with?
Do we have traction?
I don't know.
It doesn't feel like it, honestly.
David was in this musical.
That helped.
Yeah, I guess that. But even still, like the records that have come out since then are still like, I don't know. We don't make any money off this band, guys. So like, I don't know. Like, it is always funny, like talking at like about your career in music when like I don't know that any of us are like, this band is not. It's hard to consider it a career, except that I've probably been doing it longer than anything else. But like, I think yeah. So I don't know about traction in the industry, and we also are all constantly baffled by how we're figuring out like contract stuff right now, and like I still don't understand how the music industry works. Period. Like I understand how any band makes money off touring or anything else. I don't understand how anybody makes money off a record anymore, which I think the answer is you don't. But like I am truly baffled by it, which is unfortunate in some ways, but fortunate in others, because I think we still have not found any compelling reason to not just be our own barometer for what is a good song, right? So I think that does help us be able to keep like pushing ourselves to make the music we want to make, because like it doesn't seem to make any difference what we do in terms of like the returns to us. So like I think that's actually pretty good. But in terms of like traction in the industry, I don't even know where. I couldn't point you in the direction of the industry from where I'm sitting. Like, I don't know what that is.
The one thing I would say is that, you know, we were signed to the label we're on now a couple of years before David was on Broadway. So we were. It's sort of disingenuous to say like that's what got us anywhere. Obviously, it's helped a lot, but we were something. We were a thing before, and the thing that I think was that made us a thing before is the exact thing we were talking about with our friends not really liking the band necessarily. We had all been in bands or been doing music that everyone around us loved. They were like, all of our friends liked it. They thought coming to the shows was fun. I mean, for the most part. And a different, Jonathan has a very different, Jonathan's different because he had a very unique band before that. That was also successful in its own way. You didn't have any fans really. You didn't have like a ton of fans everywhere because you thought, well, everyone in my town likes it, but every town kind of has that guy. So we were like, okay, so we're making this thing that one person we know in our city likes, but one person in every city likes it. And we're the only people doing it. So that adds up to way more people than 30 of your friends liking it, but that band exists in every city. So we put it out, and it was sort of this runaway thing on the internet, but it was all these isolated people, right? But it was enough of them worldwide to add up to something like a fan base. They just didn't know each other. They weren't all in the same city. It took a lot of growing from there. But just being something that no one had ever, there were no other options for. There was nowhere else to go if you were looking for what we sounded like, is what got us that first initial push or any sort of attention.
It was just a really a confluence of like, I mean, obviously part of it is maybe that the music was good, but a lot of people make good music, you know, and we definitely felt like we made a record, Mid-City, right, that we were just going to like sort of ball up and hurl into the internet and never hear about again. And it's just like a confluence of, you know, our friend Brian, who runs Death Bomb, did a bunch of press for us for free and still does, just because he liked the band. And that got it in Anthony Fantano's hands, who got it sort of accidentally and sort of around the loop through Sub Pop's into Sub Pop's hands. And it just was like, whether or not the music was any good was like, it was the right music for that right exact moment for those exact people to hear in that order or something. Like, it's such a lucky little confluence of things. Because it really, like, it only has so much to do with the actual music, like whether or not something becomes popular. Like everyone, like somebody would like everything, right? Like anything you make, there's an audience for it somewhere, and it's just about that person, those people hearing it, you know? And we got really lucky that like enough of those people heard it that we could keep going. Because it did feel like a weird one-off side project that we probably were like, well, we made that one. Now what are we doing next? You know, it's kind of how Mid-City felt, I think, to us at the time. And certainly would have if nobody had heard it, you know.
And I know I definitely hopped on right at that juncture between the two where I was lucky enough to, you know, not have heard Mid-City and think to myself, gosh, I really hope they come up with more of this, because the self-titled was right around the corner. I think a couple singles had already been released, and I was just like, all right, let's see how this turns out. Let's see if and at that point I was like, was that first recording an album? Was it a mixtape? Like that was some of the discussions that were happening there. And
was every song we had recorded up to that point.
Yeah, but I don't know what. I don't really know the difference when you're at that level and there's no promotional push. Then what's the difference? The promotional push is us.
Yeah, we're also, I mean, we're confronted with this a lot too, but like we are of an age where like albums are things, and like we still tend to think of projects as whole statements, and I don't know that that's useful anymore from a like marketing perspective, or it's useful for us as artists to be like this is a complete thought and that's what we're putting out, you know, and it helps us to make things. But like, I don't know, younger artists who I work with don't suffer from that same hindrance. So like, it also could just be you know, you could put a song out every day and probably be served better in the way the music is consumed these days.
Yeah, I mean, this is really a tangent now, but there is something sort of just like constructed about the idea of an album, right? That's like that's not actually the way that music needs to or wants to be organized. It's just limitations of this physical medium. Like, and I was having because I teach sound design at UCLA in the theater department, and I was having this conversation with my students a couple of weeks ago. That was like, why do we think the only reason that we think of music as being audio only and not having a necessary and inherent visual component is because of the album, is because of recordings, right? That before the 20th century, music was half visual. Like you watched people making the music, and that was part of it, and being there was part of it. And I think that's coming back. Like, I think that idea like is coming back in TikTok and the internet in general, right? That like suddenly there are pieces of music that are wildly popular because you're watching those funny guys sing sea shanties or whatever, you know, like it's not really like you wouldn't listen to that recording, but you will watch it over and over again, and it's really compelling as a piece of music paired with that visual, and then the two are not separable in a way that like this has only really occurred to me recently, that the idea that music is sound only is like a 20th century invention and it's interesting, but is not like inherent in music itself, right?
Yes, it is. And now we have like, I have a whole bunch of dancer friends who spend a lot of time like these days getting asked to come to the studio by artists who are working on a new single to like come up with a TikTok dance for their song, so that not only is there a visual component to it that somebody else is doing, but also it's interactive, right? Also, there's a thing that you have to learn that goes along with it.
I look forward to some of the dances from the Enlacing and Paint Everyday video popping up on TikTok.
Oh yeah.
That'd be nice.
Any day now. So we have about maybe 5-10 minutes left. So I figured I would have River and Ethan both hop in here. Each one of you can take one of your questions, and then we'll see if we can do a quick like little lightning round to wrap up here. So let me promote River and Ethan, and then each of you guys can take one of your 2 questions that you submitted.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, my question is, when was the earliest time you can remember where you decided that music was your passion?
Well, as long as I've been alive, it was part of my landscape and my life, you know. I never thought I could make it like a real career for myself, because I grew up, you know, in a very like Western classical music house. Like I wasn't even really like allowed to listen to like pop music or the radio, but I was listening to a lot of classical music, and I was and am still like a very like unfocused, sort of undisciplined like practitioner of art. I'm very good at ideas, and I'm not very good at rote repetition of something, like say playing scales or the things that you need to do to be a very successful musician in that realm. So music was something I was always interested in, but I was like, but I don't have the hands or the mental discipline to be that kind of musician. So I'm not, and that was the only kind of musician I knew existed, right? And as I figured out that wasn't true, and I just was making music for fun, that gradually sort of shifted, or I kept finding examples of like, oh, you can do that, like that's a thing that people can do and still call themselves musicians. Oh, maybe I could do this.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, David and I became friends in 3rd grade, and one of the things, besides playing tag, which we both really liked, one of the things that we became friends about was that we both liked Parliament Funkadelic, George Clinton, and that we used to fantasize when we were like little kids, like 4th or 5th grade, we used to draw like characters from the songs, like Sir Nose and the Thumpasaurus and Mr. Wiggles, and like fantasize about like an epic cartoon about all the characters in like their little Funkland. And that, so like,
Still a good idea.
Yeah, I still think about that.
I still can't, but I can't remember like a discovery. I just remember just always, I mean, you know, obviously we loved music enough for that to be like a basis of a 3rd grade friendship. So
Yeah.
It's really easy. Sorry, Davey, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
It's really easy to look back at your life and draw a really like clear path to where you are, but in the moment, right, it never feels that way. Like I can, you know, look back and think of all of these really like formative moments that I'm like, clearly that happened, and so I'm doing this now. But there are all these other kind of formative moments that had equal weight at the time that I didn't pursue. You know, I have these very strong memories of like as a 1st grader going to the 3rd grade science fair at my school and seeing all the 3rd graders like science projects that felt like so professional, you know, and there was one girl who had built a robot out of cardboard and had put just one of those Fisher-Price tape recorders in its head to be its voice, and it was just playing some electronic record. In my mind, it was like Gershon Kingsley's like In Sounds from Way Way Out or something, but it was like bleeps and bloops and synthesizer music, and it was the first time I'd ever heard a synthesizer, I think, probably. And I remember just thinking, what is that magical, insane sound? I'm so interested. This is the coolest thing I have ever seen in my life. And in my mind now, of course, that shaped my entire life. That cardboard robot is why I have this thing. But, you know, there are all kinds of like other, you know, there are all kinds of other events that had I picked one of my other interests at the time to really, you know, to really like go in on, those would have been formative too, you know.
And I think, River, we have time for your question, which kind of piggybacks off of that, kind of moving forward a few years beyond elementary school, looking at some of your high school experiences.
I was wondering if you guys were involved in high school band or chorus or anything, or if you guys played any instruments growing up.
I played the alto saxophone for a very long time. I started in like 3rd grade and went sort of through high school. I would play on my own a little bit in college, but not really. Actually, just thinking about buying one. I haven't played one in so long. But
next album, no rapping, all
sax solo. Everyone's excited. But I you know, what was interesting for me about that is like I loved playing, but I was not. I was in a band with like Ambrose Akinmusiri and Jonathan Finlay. These guys would go on to become like professional jazz musicians and
like legit famous ones.
Yeah, Thomas Pridgeon, who drums for the Mars Volta, and like I grew up with those guys. Like we were on a jazz band together, and then there was me. Like not again, I sort of like Jonathan, like did not have the patience to run scales all the time. Like was a good reader. Francis Starlight, yeah, Francis.
What is in the water in that little corner of the Bay Area where you guys come from? But every one of your friends are like some like talented, famous person. Like it's really, really wild. Coming from Riverside. That is not.
But yeah, it became clear at a certain point that like these guys were. Their instrument was how they spoke, you know what I'm saying? Like they were so much more communicative through their instrument than I was. But so when a friend of mine asked me to start making rap songs with him, it was like the first time I had felt as free as they seemed when they were improvising. I was like, oh, I know way more about words than I know about scales. And like I get to use the things I was good at, like rhythm and timing and stuff. Those parts of the music were like, oh, I can use all of that here, and like I maybe have a better chance of being able to come close to like the way that I see those guys like be able to do what they do, which felt like a goddamn. I mean, they were at 15 years old, like watching somebody play it solo like that was like, what the. Am I doing? Like I should definitely not be playing music because if that's what music is, that's not what I'm doing. You know?
I mean, I never could hack it with like high school musicians, even, you know, just in that trajectory of music. I didn't really have any place. I was in a lot of plays, and I actually like I've played a lot of instruments and taken a lot of lessons in a lot of different instruments, and like not stuck with any of them. Took violin lessons very young because my mom played violin, and I thought it was very, you know, so like from 3 to 8 or something, I played violin, and then I played trumpet for a couple of years, and I played bagpipes for about a year in there too. Because I know it seems like a joke, but the janitor at my elementary school was the Scottish guy with red hair who played bagpipes and taught bagpipe lessons, and I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, and then I took a lot of voice lessons. Is actually the thing that I probably spent the most time actually studying was singing, which I don't do at all now, but occasionally on demos. But I don't really sing in public anymore.
So I'm expecting some guest verses from Jonathan, some bagpipes, and some alto sax from David on the next song. I mean, I thought it was you playing clarinet on Puppy for Hanukkah, so I guess all my preconceptions just shattered. So we're probably gonna have to wrap it up there, just because we have to transition to the next block here. But just on behalf of all the students and the teachers and folks and the list of attendees, thank you guys so much for taking time out of your very busy schedules to chat with us and to give us some insight into your experiences, your careers. I know I speak for everybody when I say it was very enlightening, very entertaining, and yeah, just thank you again.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Anytime.